rolling. It will be on in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome, Farouk. It's so good to have you back. I think we talked some time ago about remote sensing with a pyramid in Egypt. We talked about the moon landing. We went to visit your Center for Remote Sensing at Boston University, and I think we were also there that night that you got that wonderful award from the International Institute of Boston, the Outstanding Immigrant of the Year. It's a pleasure to have you back, and we're just wondering what you've been doing since then. But I know you've been doing a lot of new things, but first of all, you're the director of the Center for Remote Sensing. What is remote sensing?
That's a good question. First, I'm delighted to be here with the Arabic Hour. And remote sensing is basically studying something from a distance, as if you're sensing something from afar. So
Feeling it.
Feeling it or figuring it out without really having to touch it.
Okay.
So let me tell you the simplest form of remote sensing is if I go to a medical doctor and he checks my chest with an X-ray machine. That is really a form of remote sensing because there is a black box that emits X-rays towards my body, and the X-rays go through the flesh and the bone differently, and the result is recorded on film. And the doctor looks at that film and figures out what is wrong with me or whether I'm healthy or not. So that is in a way remote sensing because there is a box, the sensor, rays that you do not see go through the body, film that you can interpret. So now if I take a camera, whether it is taking pictures with color film or black and white or looking at the earth with temperature sensitive sensors or film, or whether it's looking at infrared rays or ultraviolet rays, whatever it is, different ranges. And if I take that camera and put it on a balloon to go up above the earth, or an aircraft or a spacecraft, and look towards the earth and take a picture of what this camera sees, and then I interpret this picture, that is remote sensing. But also if I have an instrument like a black box that I can put on the surface of the earth and it emits radar waves or some other waves towards the ground and these waves are reflected back from layers beneath the surface, and I can figure out the subsurface structure within the earth, that is remote sensing because I actually sensed or figured out the subsurface layering without having to be there, without having to drill. I did that with a black box that emitted rays. So that is all of these. It's a huge range of things that you can do, whether from space or right on the ground, to examine something without having to really be there or without having to touch it. That's why this business of remote sensing.
It sounds like wonderful miracles to me, I'll tell you. How did you happen to come to Boston University to direct the center there?
Well, remote sensing began in the exploration of the moon. When we started looking at the moon.
I remember you.
Yeah, and trying to figure out where the astronauts would land, and therefore we took pictures of the moon and to figure it out. After the Apollo program, we started saying, aha, now that we have figured all of these things, we can look at the Earth from space and do the same thing. And we started doing that. And then we started thinking about real good cameras, fantastic cameras. And when we began to look at the Earth and to make really fabulous cameras to put on the space shuttle, to begin to look at the Earth, I joined a company called iTech. I was vice president for that company that produced the large cameras for the space shuttle missions. And this is near Boston, here in Lexington.
Yes.
And that was in 1982. 4 years later, I was called in by Boston University to be asked just a question of if we were interested in remote sensing and would like to see how it applies here in educationally at BU. How would we do this? So I told them about the fact that they're starting now late because remote sensing in some other universities started some 20 years back. And you don't have the critical mass of individuals to do it. So rather than making a structure that is kind of a mutual admiration society of a few people that know about remote sensing and talk to each other, makes a facility for people from different departments to utilize so that it can be interdisciplinary. You can bring in archaeologists and geographers and geologists to work together applying these tools. So they kind of liked the idea, and I was asked, what would it take to get you to do this thing? I was at the time vice president of a company, and I actually laughed when I was asked the question, and John Silver said, why do you laugh? And so I said, because I've always said I really think about it. I would do it only if I have a great deal of time to do my own research. And he said, and what else? So I told him, and then what else? So he started listing things, and he said, if I get you all this, will you come and do it? I said, sure. And he did. In 3 weeks, he had it all discussed with the board of trustees. And they called me up and they said, well, we got you everything. When can you come and do it? So I did in 1986.
Oh, how great for all of us. I remember you talked about a pyramid, but I understand that since that time there are some new pyramids that found out about. Can you talk about that?
Yes, the amazing thing about Egypt is the fact that we know for sure that we have not figured everything about the ancient Egyptians yet. Nearly every year, there is some fantastic discovery. After we figure out, perhaps we know everything about the Valley of the Kings, we find that there are huge tombs that had never been crossed. In the Giza Plateau, where people, archaeologists from around the world, have been excavating, studying, digging, mapping, and then all of a sudden, we have some images that show an area that looks somewhat disturbed. You clear up the sand from that, and you find the structure or this pyramid in the Giza Plateau, which has been trampled over by hundreds, if not thousands, of archaeologists from around the world from the beginning of this century. So there is always discovery, and it's a good thing because there should be something for the next generations to do too. They should be as surprised as we have been by King Tut's tomb, and the mystery continues. So I'm actually delighted that that's the case, and I believe that findings and discoveries are going to continue in Egypt for a very long period of time.
Very promising. I understand, of course, you've done a lot of work studying deserts. You're an expert on deserts and desertification. I understand that you've been working in the Sinai on water.
Yes. The Egyptian government has had plans for the Sinai for a very long period of time. The Sinai Peninsula, because of the problem with Israel, had been devoid of population. We haven't really used it in Egypt much at all. And now that Egypt has signed the peace treaty with Israel, and hopefully Israel is going to sign a peace treaty with the rest of the Arab world, the Egyptian government started thinking now the Sinai should begin to be utilized. So where are the resources, the basic resources for human habitation? And this should be good fertile soil and water for agriculture. In the north, there is already a canal that will take a little bit of water from left over in the Nile, under the Suez Canal, and onto the northern part of the Sinai, all the way to El Arish in the northeast. That will serve the northern part of the Sinai. However, part of the best soil in the Sinai is really in the middle part of the Sinai, and that's very far away, and it is higher than the low areas where the canal will be. So the question was, does this area have any groundwater so we can utilize this groundwater where the good fertile soil is on the plateau? So that was our job really. Went in for 3 years, looked at the whole area of satellite images, figured out the potential for groundwater concentration, and selected places for drilling. We actually selected 10 sites, and I'm happy to say that since then had been 7 of these sites have been drilled, and all of them produce water. And so that's, I think that this will indicate that the Sinai is really developable. It is promising, and you can develop the land for agriculture using its own resources from within, like groundwater and fertile soil.
How important that would be. Remote sensing is so helpful in the area of ecology and the environment. And I understand that you've been doing an evaluation of the effects of the Gulf War on Kuwait. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that has actually been a very significant aspect of application of remote sensing, because satellite images, when they are taken of a place at different times of the year, you can actually study the differences between one image and the other very simply and very easily. You take a picture
Different with the seasons.
seasons or just different times. If you, for instance, you take a picture of an area at a given time, and something happened in that area, whether it is natural or man-made. It may be a flash flood, it may be a fire, forest fire, it may be anything. Yeah, whether it's man-made or natural, doesn't matter. Something has changed in that environment. So you take a picture of the same area with the same instrument at another time, at a later time. And you actually superpose these two pictures using the computer on each other, and ask the computer to give you only the difference between the two. It is called change detection. So you only want to get the change from time 1 to time 2. Then you look at the area that has changed, and then you begin to interpret what this change is due to, how much of it, what is the area that's affected, why, and how much. So that
Mind-boggling to me.
So it is really a very useful.
It's marvelous when
very useful.
think what the computer
Yep.
is able to do.
So we applied that in a big way in Kuwait after the Gulf War, and the burning of the oil wells, and the spill of the oil along the coastal zone, and the disturbance of the desert surface by soldiers from both sides, from the coalition forces and the Iraqi soldiers, and digging into the desert, building berms, digging hiding places for their equipment and their food, and so disturbing the desert surface exposes a great deal of soil to the action of wind, and the wind comes in to pick up soil and forms sand dunes. So what we did was to take photographs taken of Kuwait before the war and photographs taken after the war, and we compared them in using the computers, fancy high-speed computers, to get the difference between the two times and figure out the areas that have been changed, and then went into Kuwait to figure out what that change is exactly, and then return to make specific maps of how much of the land has been affected and in what way and what to do about it. So that has been going on for 4 years, and based on that, and this whole project was supported by the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences. It's like our own National Science Foundation here, but it is specifically for Kuwait. And the Director General of the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences is a geologist himself, is a good friend of mine, and he realized the value of all of what we did, which has now been given to the government and the environmental agencies to follow our recommendations of what to do based on our scientific findings. And he also asked me whether we are able to put together a package of all of these pictures in a book about the Kuwait environment from satellite images, because nothing like that has ever been done before. So we're finishing this now. We're putting together a book on the environment of Kuwait as seen from satellite images.
So anybody can benefit from this wonderful research.
Very much
I
so.
understand another application is in the Mediterranean Sea, that they've been having some ecological problems there too.
The problem within the Mediterranean Sea is that it's a closed basin, and the parts of it that are really almost closed, like the Adriatic, they do not get as much of the currents that mix the water and within the basin, as well as with the Atlantic Ocean, because there is only that little exit
at Gibraltar.
At Gibraltar, yes. So the result of this is the fact that if a great deal of things are dumped into the sea, as in the refuse, as in wastewater from the cities, as in chemicals from the factories and so on, that degrades the environment and the water considerably. And it is biodegradation, meaning it kills fish. So now the northern Adriatic, for instance, there is absolutely no fish that lives in the north. It's almost a Dead Sea because of the things that have been dumped into it. Recognizing this, the countries of the northern part of the Mediterranean pushed within the United Nations, with the support from the United Nations Environment Program, as well as the United Nations Development Program, about a project to clean up the Mediterranean. And that is under the UN umbrella and supported by other agencies. That's called the Mediterranean Action Plan, MAP, so that they will see what could be done to investigate the situation and clean it up, because if you investigate the situation, you will figure out where the sources of the pollution are, and you go to such and such factory and you tell them, listen, you better clean up your chemicals before you dump in the sea and so on. So supposedly within 20 years, the Mediterranean is going to be a clean sea again.
Oh, I love that place. You know, the Mediterranean is just so important to us all. And it's just such a pleasure to be there that I'm delighted to hear that there's all this action going on.
And luckily, the southern part of the Mediterranean, where the better beaches are, is not as bad yet, because the population in North Africa is not very dense. It is the population in the northern part of the Mediterranean, where there are a lot of cities that have been badly affecting the northern part of the Mediterranean. So the southern part is still okay, but naturally, if the northern part is cleaned up, then the southern part will benefit too.
Mediterranean has been a busy place for a long, long time.
That's right.
I understand, too, that you've been working with the Sultanate of Oman.
Yes.
Oman seems to be very attractive to tourists. There's a lot of interest in that area. I know we had someone here at the Arabic Hour that showed us some beautiful photos. I'm just anxious to go there. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Oman is one of these magical places. It is in the southern tip of Arabia. It has been open to the world for thousands of years. The Omanis have been real seafarers, like Sinbad, the sailor. They have been trading with the whole world, back and forth for a very long period of time.
At the price of frankincense and myrrh?
Yes, in addition to the fact to the pepper trade.
Yes.
For instance, there was our port here at Salem, Mass, that used to be the main
Clipper
port.
ships?
Yep,
Oh.
the main port before Boston became a big port.
Yes.
The clipper ships used to go out of Salem, go all the way to Indonesia to buy the pepper. And actually the pepper that they bought, and the pepper and spices, it came all the way to the United States. It was cleaned up, ground, and so on, and went to Europe for sale. And it was very interesting that the Sultan of Oman at the time, it was called Muscat, was the protector of that passageway. So our captains from Salem here, they would go and stop in Muscat, pay their respects to the Sultan, give him some presents, and therefore they would be protected in the going to Indonesia and Southeast Asia to buy these things and come back. So it has been open to the world for a very long period of time. Actually, right now in the Peabody Museum in Salem, there is a very nice painting of the ambassador of Oman that used to come here to Salem during these years. So Oman has been open to the world for a very long period of time, and it's a wonderful country. Its people are quite knowledgeable of environment, and they are quite sensitive. The land itself is quite geologically young, so it is very pretty. Lots of mountains, near beaches, and so on. And the Sultan of Oman is a highly educated, level-headed, very wonderful individual, Sultan Qaboos. And he actually wanted to evaluate the potential for groundwater resources. And to him, he has a ministry of water resources, and he has consultants, and he has a lot of information. But it seems that there is a little bit of contradiction between what he hears. So what he really wanted to do was to get a group of scientists that have no vested interests to come here and evaluate this based on the best available technology. So I was asked then to put together a team to evaluate the potential of groundwater resources in all of Oman, because they're thinking in some years they would have to either erect desalination plants from seawater or do something else to satisfy the water needs of the future. So is there enough groundwater that we can depend on, or do we have to go to desalination? So we're doing this for the next 3 years.
Sounds fascinating. Tell me, what's in the future in your work?
The remote sensing has really not developed completely yet. I think we're still kind of at the beginning of it. We haven't really figured out exactly where it's going to end. For example, we know for certain that the instruments that we have from space are able to detect certain chemistries of the exposed rocks, soils, and sand. And we have not yet figured out the signature of each of these elements or concentrations of the elements in a given area. If we do, then we'll be able to consider all of these satellite pictures as chemical maps to lead us to places to know exactly what is the composition of that soil for agriculture, exactly where is concentration of iron or magnesium or copper for mining, and so on. So that is coming yet. So this is something that we're still working on now as something that will develop in the future. As far as the technology of sensing itself, it's also developing very fast. The US government has now approved for the civilians like us to use pictures that has the ability or that have the ability to recognize something on the ground that is 3 feet or larger. So now, yes, so now there will be, actually there are 4 companies that are now developing systems to do just that. So in the past, we used to work with things that are 100 feet or bigger and so on, and now we're going to come down to 3 feet. So the detail of satellite images is going to be fantastic. That will be helpful in city planning, in figuring out where to put roads, and figuring out all kinds of things that we could not use in the past because of the resolution, the ability to depict details on the ground. So it is really going way ahead of us right now.
It sounds like this is a beautiful program in the service of man and the improvement of the environment. I want to thank you so much. I've learned so much. I'm just fascinated with all this, and I know that our audience will just love it. Thank you ever so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
I hope I didn't leave anything out.
No, you did very well.
Yeah.